In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años.
Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SEDI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
Darius Kark of St. Lucia, who has entrusted me and given me the honor of chairing today's session. I give you a warm welcome and thank you for all attending today. Let's begin with consideration of the order of business. You all have the draft, which has been submitted under document CDOD-152/24. We open the floor if there are any comments or objections. We do not see any comments, and therefore we will adopt the order of business. Adopted. And now we will move on to the next item on the order of business, which is the thematic dialogue of today's meeting. We have the valuable concept note prepared by the Secretariat, and thank you very much for your work in doing that. It was distributed, and the topic is connecting cities and regions of the Americas to boost subnational competitiveness. This space provides member states with a platform for dialogue on policies and programs that promote local economic development, as well as initiatives aimed at strengthening the connections between cities and regions of the hemisphere. Dear colleagues, delegates, cities are key drivers of global economic activity, and they generate over 80% of the global GDP. Their development can drive innovation, entrepreneurship, and quality of life for citizens. However, the region faces challenges such as inequality, social exclusion, and limitations in infrastructure within our countries. In the framework of the OAS, the Inter-American Competitiveness Network, REAC, has underscored the importance of subnational competitiveness in promoting cooperation, exchange of experiences, and best practices between subregions, countries, and institutions throughout the continent. Tools such as exchanges for competitiveness of the Americas and the Competitiveness Exchange, ACE, as well as the group of experts on subnational competitiveness at REAC, have facilitated innovative methodologies and dialogue in order to measure and improve local and regional competitiveness. With that in mind, I'm delighted to give a warm welcome to our guests and panelists today, who will be sharing their experiences and perspectives with regard to this topic. Here we have Nathan Ole, the President and Executive Director of the International Economic Development Council, IEDC, Ms. Anna Rubin, the Local Development Forum Manager at the OCDE, and we also have Misha Loban-Clark, the Executive Director of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And so we will hear from our first expert, Mr. Nathan Ole, the President and Executive Director of the International Economic Development Council, IDC. Mr. Ole is a recognized global leader in economic development with outstanding experience in the public, private sectors and non-profit sector as well. His work includes decades in the local, state, and federal levels, with significant contributions to rural development and the creation of strategic partnerships. Mr. Ole, I give you the floor.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, and for representatives from across the Americas. I am Nathan Ole. I'm the President and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. We are the world's largest association for economic developers. For us, economic development really centers on driving equitable economic outcomes in communities of all sizes across the world. I believe I have some slides that should be presented here shortly. There we go, perfect. IDC has more than 4,500 members from across the world, including many from throughout the Americas, and we are here in service of the communities that economic developers serve. For us, that means providing tools and resources to drive economic prosperity and quality of life in communities of all sizes. Last year, we launched our new strategic plan with a focus on 3 main key priorities. The first being impact on the individual and the organization, trying to help individual practitioners in economic development and economic development organizations continue to further their work and have tools and resources to drive economic opportunity in the places that they serve. Second, an impact on the profession itself. The economic development profession is changing rapidly. And for us, we want to be there in service of the profession to help move economic development forward and help practitioners drive those economic opportunities in their communities. And finally, an impact on the global community. How can we bring communities and regions together from across the world to learn from one another, to build upon what is happening in different parts of the world, and to ensure that we can connect the economic development community on a global scale? So what does that mean for us in this context, in speaking about the region and the cities across the Americas and how they can drive economic opportunity? First of all, we have to recognize that our economies are deeply intertwined, that none of this work happens in a vacuum or in one community, but essentially building that global community together to make sure that we can drive equitable economic outcomes for communities in different regions across the world. Recent supply chain disruptions and nearshoring trends demonstrate the critical need for regional cooperation and collaboration. And finally, we must move beyond viewing our own economic development lens in a local perspective and ensure that we're driving regional collaboration and understanding the impact that happens here is happening in many other places across the world. We want to do that by a focus on multi-scale development. What does that mean? For us, economic development must operate simultaneously at multiple levels. It has to happen through local communities, through regional cluster, through cross-border partnerships and continental initiatives, and ensure that we can scale resources and institutional capacity to allow for that to happen. The strong local foundations enable effective international partnerships. For us, we have a strong belief at IDC that collaboration and connectedness is the key to the future of economic development and of economic prosperity of places across the world. We want to share learnings and accelerate innovation. We want to drive resource optimization through complementary strengths. We want to enhance competitiveness in global markets. And we want to ensure greater resilience through diversified networks. We don't want to rely on one key component or strategy. We want to make sure we diversify those opportunities and share the learnings across the world. For us, those effective partnerships are really built on 2 main key components. First, leadership development. How do we develop international competencies? How do we make sure that we can understand what is happening in different regions of the world and take those key learnings and drive leadership locally and regionally? How do we build cross-cultural collaboration expertise? And how do we ensure that strong local institutions can be capable of global engagement? Second, they need to be done in sustainable strategies. How do we create clear shared objectives and metrics across countries, across regions of the world? How do we create a formal partnership framework and network that builds that connectedness and that collaboration on a daily basis? We want to build long-term funding commitments so that it's sustainable and not just a one-time infusion of investments. And finally, we need to build regular communication channels, opportunities for folks to come together, to learn from one another, to learn alongside one another, and to build upon those connections that they're building on an everyday basis. For us, we have a couple of key initiatives that we'd like to share a little bit more about. The first is the Economic Recovery Corps. This is a new program that we launched in partnership with many other organizations over the last year, where we're actually embedding what we call Economic Recovery Corps fellows directly into economically distressed places, starting here in the United States in rural, urban, and indigenous and tribal communities. Those 65 fellows will be directly in those communities for 2.5 years, building long-term sustainable capacity in places that have often been underinvested or under-resourced. These folks have been on the ground for just over 7 months now and have already leveraged more than $100 million for these communities. For us, there are really 2 main goals of the Economic Recovery Corps. The first is to build capacity in these under-resourced places, and the second is to build the pipeline of the next generation of leaders in economic development so that they can learn alongside one another and build the future of economic development for these economically distressed places. Second, the Race, Equity, and Economic Development Initiative that IDC built starting back in 2021. A real focus on how do we build equity at the center of your economic development strategy? How do we recognize the inequities that exist, and how do we really adapt and drive more equitable economic outcomes for places of all sizes? And finally, the America's Competitiveness Exchange. This program, obviously built through the Organization of American States, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and many other partners, is a great example of how we can drive regional competitiveness, regional collaboration, and bring leaders together to share knowledge and resources. So what does that mean for us when we talk about equitable economic outcomes? First of all, it starts with shared values. How do we build trust between partners at different development strategies? We know and recognize that different regions, different countries are at different levels of engagement within economic development. So how do we build trust across those institutions? How do we recognize innovative practices and share those across partners? How do we drive a focus on traditionally underserved areas, in particular rural and indigenous in nature? And how do we make sure that we can drive implementation of these strategies that are shared across partners? We want to make sure that we, number one, understand the inequities that exist and recognize them and build new metrics to measure against progress against those inequities. How do we create partnerships across national governments, local governments, universities, and the private sector? And how do we make sure that we can really build a collaboration that sticks, that's sustainable well into the future? A couple of best practices that we've seen in our work. First, you have to commit to knowledge sharing. You have to be willing to share your thoughts, your resources, your learnings, and do it in a way that's going to help build collaboration across the spectrum. Second, you've got to invest in cross-border partnerships and be willing not only to recognize, but to invest in these partnerships. Third, you always have to be building relationships. That relationship building never stops. It is a daily activity that has to be a focus of your long-term goals. You've got to demand equitable practices and have a focus on equitable economic outcomes, and you have to focus on constant collaboration. It is absolutely critical for you to focus on the connectivity and the collaboration that must and will exist well into the future. And finally, for us, we want to be partners with all of you in this work. Economic development is a cross-border collaboration. It is a field that is constantly evolving, especially over the last 5 years. And for us as an organization that represents economic developers from across the world, we're just thankful for the opportunity to be in front of groups like this, to connect with all of you, and to learn from all of you. So thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oli, for your presentation and sharing with all of us the strategic role that cities and regions play in economic development and your perspective. Also, thank you very much for the recommendations and best practices, which certainly are very useful for those of us present. I'm now delighted to introduce Ms. Anna Rubin, the manager of the Local Development Forum from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Ms. Rubin has led key initiatives in local and regional development. She also led the 2019 Ministerial Declaration on Building Better Futures for Regions, Cities, and Rural Areas. Her vast experience includes many areas, including drafting policies from the OECD, and this is very valuable to enriching our work today. She's also worked at UNESCO. So without further ado, Ms. Rubin, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I have a set of slides that I believe will be pulled up. Great, thank you so much. Bolstering local development is really at the core of the work that we do at the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities, where I sit at the OECD. So it's really an honor to be speaking to this council on these topics today. I'm going to be focusing on experiences from the OECD, but hopefully they'll be transferable lessons for all of you. Next slide, please. So the first thing I want to look at is, why do we at the OECD think it's important to go local? And there's really 3 key reasons for this. The first is that we see that there are persistent geographic disparities within our member countries. So for example, within OECD countries, labor productivity is twice as high in the most productive region as in the least productive region. And our latest data shows that it's really the largest metropolitan regions that are pulling ahead in terms of GDP growth. So they're leading the pack, but we also know that they're facing significant challenges in terms of congestion, inequality, and affordability. So even those places that are doing well face challenges that require a place-based approach. Looking ahead, we also know that megatrends linked to the green and digital transition will have uneven geographic impacts. So for example, about 18% of workers across the OECD have what we call green task jobs, but the share really varies within countries. At the lowest level, some regions have 7% of workers in green task jobs. At the highest level, some regions have up to 35%. And again, here we see that capital regions are really leading the pack. So this could further exacerbate existing geographic disparities. And the final thing I want to say here is that we know that subnational governments hold a lot of the policy levers needed to respond to these challenges and opportunities. On average, subnational governments are responsible for about 40% of total public expenditure across the OECD and 69% of climate significant investment. So if we're not thinking local, if we're not thinking about involving governments across levels, we're really missing a big piece of the picture. Next slide, please. Regions or cities are also the place where we see the most potential for putting in place integrated approaches to local economic development. So increasingly, for example, we're seeing that workforce or skills development and local economic development are really two sides of the same coin. This is especially true in the context of the growing labor and skill shortages that we're seeing across OECD countries. A 2024 Manpower survey showed that 75% of employers said they're struggling to find the skilled talent, which is double the rate from a decade ago. So, of course, upgrading skills is not just a public sector responsibility, and that's why I was really happy to see a Chamber of Commerce on this panel with us today, because we see a really big role for private sector engagement, especially in the context of rapidly changing skills needs. For example, to respond to generative AI, we really need employers on board to help the public sector both identify how to respond and put in place rapid response programs. So earlier this year, we released a new paper with the International Chamber of Commerce and Eurochambers to map how chambers of commerce are engaging in skills policies and how they were really playing a role in helping to link up those local skills and economic development policies. We looked at the activities of about 130 chambers across 60 countries, and we saw that they're really playing an important role in interfacing between the business community and the local skills systems. And in particular, they're really important in helping SMEs both identify what their actually skills needs were and how they can access relevant trainings to help support them. So you can see on the screen, I've given two examples. I don't think I have time to go into them in depth today, but one is the House of Training in Luxembourg, which really takes this professionals train other professionals approach. So it's entrepreneurs training entrepreneurs, for example. And the other is the Chamber of Commerce system in France, which plays a really large role in vocational training there. They train about 400,000 people annually through their different types of vocational and business schools. Next slide, please. I also want to quickly highlight some of the work that we're doing as part of an ongoing project on transforming places. And through this project, we're really trying to see what we can learn from places that have managed to turn themselves around. If you look at kind of traditional economic models and traditional economic research, we know that success tends to breed success. So that places that are doing well, it's easier for them to adapt to transitions, to be more resilient in the face of downturns. But we also know there's a lot to learn from places that have broken the mold or kind of been able to break out of path-dependent development processes. So two relevant examples you can see on the screen here are Malmö, Sweden, and the Basque Country in Spain. So Malmö was kind of a shipbuilding community. It went through a rough period of deindustrialization, and it's really managed to turn itself around in recent years. And some of the contributing factors for that turnaround were long-term and ambitious leadership that was willing to take risks. They also managed to leverage their connections with Copenhagen, which is just across the sound from them. So they really took this kind of broader regional approach to economic development, facilitated by a big infrastructure project in the form of the Øresund Bridge. And then finally, they also took a comprehensive approach to urban development with sustainability at the core. So for example, when they were making a decision about where to put their new university, they didn't put it kind of outside the town, but they really put it in part of their core urban center as part of their port redevelopment project. The Basque Country of Spain is another really interesting example. They made significant investments in R&D and innovation. They really focused on upgrading their human capital via vocational education and training. But they also made big investments in the culture sector, for example, through the Guggenheim in Bilbao, and they really leveraged their strong cooperative sector, which shows the role the social economy can play. Through all of this, there's also an increasing understanding of the importance of leaders and institutions. And that's why it was really interesting to hear about Nathan's work they're doing around leadership development. And what we found is those are the kind of the X factors that can't be captured in some of the traditional economic models, but can really help explain some of the success of these places. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to close by saying that's just a little flavor of the work that we're doing at the OECD around local economic development. And I really encourage you to check out our resources and share them with your communities. So we have a wealth of data that goes beyond national averages. You can see a little screenshot from our new regional resilience tracker. We also have a lot of work that both looks at these topics from a thematic point of view, for example, looking at the role of cultural and local development, but also in specific cities and regions. And then the final thing I want to flag is that we also provide a platform for peer learning and capacity building. And in particular, we're really excited to be bringing our local development forum, which is our flagship event for bringing together different stakeholders working in local economic development every year. And for the first time, we're going to be holding this event outside of Europe in 2025 in Barranquilla, Colombia. And so we're very pleased to be speaking right now with OAS colleagues to see how we can engage them and engage your constituencies in this work. Next slide, please. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity to present and exchange. I'm also looking forward to learning from all of your experiences. And as one final plug, I just want to invite all of you to join us on Thursday for the launch of our new report, Job Creation and Local Economic Development, which is going to look at the geography of generative AI. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rubin, for your analysis and highlighting the importance of local connections for bolstering economic, inclusive growth and competitiveness. Your perspective and approach on why the local perspective is so important has been very important, and thank you very much for that presentation. And finally, we'll hear from Ms. Misha-Lorraine Lobin-Clark, the Executive Director of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Ms. Lobin-Clark is a specialist in management and communications with over 25 years of experience in organizational and corporate leadership. Under her direction, the Chamber has strengthened its position as a key driver of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Barbados. Ms. Lobin-Clark, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador, and good night from Dubai, and good morning to all the prominent representatives present. And I thank you for the opportunity given to us to just share on a regional initiative being undertaken by the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry to bolster regional cooperation across the Americas, and specifically I'll be speaking about an initiative between Barbados and Panama, two OAS member states. So I'd just like to just start out by saying, it's a critical time when many nations in the region, including Barbados, have begun to look at new trading partners across the Americas to help drive growth in the current evolving global economy. The Chamber recently led a delegation of Barbadian businesses on a trade mission to Panama City to explore new opportunities, establishing valuable partnerships, and gaining first-hand insights into Panama's growing economy. And this trade mission was organized in collaboration with Pro Panama, Export Barbados, Invest Barbados, the Embassy of Barbados in Panama, and the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. Now, the two catalysts for this regional cooperation was the fact that one, Barbados established an embassy in Panama City in September 2019, and this move was part of Barbados's effort to strengthen diplomatic relations and economic cooperation with Panama. Certainly, of course, recognizing that Panama is an important partner in the region, and its position also as a hemispheric hub could enhance trade and investment opportunities for Barbados. And in the case of the Barbados Chamber, the two main catalysts for this regional partnership with Pro-Panama was first, the fact that it aligns with the strategic mandate of the Chamber, which is a private sector organization facilitating opportunities for trade and business expansion for the business sector in Barbados. And Pro-Panama itself, it was aligned with Pro-Panama's objective, and Pro-Panama is Panama's investment and promotion agency. Second catalyst is America's Competitiveness Exchange Program, ACE, which is organized by the OAS, and it continues to serve as an effective vehicle to foster meaningful connections and collaboration and partnerships to advance investments and economic growth for the countries in the Caribbean and the Americas. It was the 17th edition of ACE hosted in Panama this year that facilitated this connection between the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Pro-Panama. And we had exploratory talks during that ACE program on how these two organizations can jointly promote initiatives that will drive trade, investment opportunities, and economic cooperation between Barbados and Panama. And less than 2 months later, solidified that commitment with the establishment of an MOU that we signed on significantly on the occasion of the Republic of Panama's opening of an embassy in Bridgetown in May 2024. And 5 months later, we were leading the first trade mission to Panama, and that marked the first fruit of this MOU to establish and explore new market opportunities between our two countries. Next slide, please. I think I didn't say next. So could you go to the third slide that speaks to the trade mission objectives? Thank you. So the trade mission sought to, and we undertook this in a very strategic way, looking at measurable strategic objectives, one of which was market analysis and strategic entry. We defined this trade mission by ensuring that we did market analysis, identify demand and supply gaps that exist, looking at what potential opportunities existed for diversifying or export and import activities on behalf of Barbadian companies. And it involves certainly targeted analysis of Panama's market potential for key Barbadian products, looking at high growth sectors such as food and beverage, rum, sweet biscuits, liqueurs, and as well as health and pharmaceutical products and high demand consumer goods. Our second key measurable strategic objective was looking at structured B2B engagement for direct commercial integration. And thirdly, we undertook in-depth regulatory and trade infrastructure analysis by ensuring that while we were on the ground, we included site visits and consultations with Panama's key economic institutions that were able to provide our businesses with critical insights into the regulatory framework and operational logistics that support Panama's as a regional trade and distribution hub. We also undertook to promote sustainable business practices and cooperation as another strategic output, as well as strengthening diplomatic ties. How did we do that? We ensured that the trade mission provided a platform for reinforcing trade relations between the two, and we ensure that we did this in collaboration with the two ambassadors, both the ambassador of Barbados as well as the ambassador for Panama, and other government officials that we know would be key to making any form of regional cooperation and regional integration a success. Next slide, please. What then were the key outcomes for this initiative? Through the fact that we did a strategic analysis and a strategic planning and execution of this event initiative, we were able to, one, realize enhanced bilateral trade engagements. In fact, we from our research and our survey results, the mission facilitated over 15 high value business to business connection between Panamanian and Barbadian businesses. And this was a significant proportion of the participants, reporting, of course, that they had high potential for converting initial engagements into concrete partnerships. We also had sector specific matchmaking success because we ensured that we had targeted matchmaking enabling businesses from priority areas, including health technology, manufacturing, and renewable energy, ensuring that they were meeting and engaging with relevant Panamanian stakeholders. There was also, in terms of our successful outcome, a market penetration and export potential in terms of market entry readiness. And we estimate in terms of projected export volume that this will abound as a result of this mission, in terms of projected 15% increase in Barbadian products exported to Panama over the next 2 years. We also realized logistics and cost efficiency gains because we had site visits to the Colon Free Zone, Panama Pacifico, and the chamber successfully negotiated in the case of COPA, who has logistics facilities. We were able to negotiate a discounted arrangement in terms of incentive for Barbadian businesses to be able to move their goods between Panama and Barbados. Certainly, in terms of another key outcome, we realized brand visibility, market awareness, and coming out of this, finally, we were able to highlight capacity building and strategic partnerships. Next slide, please. I think the next slide would just show you a snapshot of some of the successes which were highlighted in terms of brand visibility for both countries. Next slide, please. So in closing, what we wanted to share with you is what we think are some of the key strategies that what we did could help other OAS member states to bolster their competitiveness. And we have presented it in this slide. We think that once you have multilateral frameworks and that can be leveraged through MOUs as templates, it then forms the basis for similar partnerships that OAS member states can enter into. We feel that a capacity building program is another recommendation that we think would like to, having learned from this experience, that we can share with you, that if we launch joint capacity building initiatives under the umbrella of the OAS, focusing on skills development in trade facilitation and regulatory compliance, that it will be critical to driving the regional cooperation that we seek to see across the Americas. We also want to posit that, if we have data sharing agreements, as well as, look at regional value chains, work towards how we can integrate supply chains to create regional value chains, it will certainly enhance the competitiveness of member states across global markets. I will end by answering a question I was asked, because I'm very conscious of time. I was asked to address how can the private sector support and accelerate the connections among cities and regions to expand economic linkages for trade and investment and innovation in OAS member states, and what, from the perspective of the Chamber, we feel are key economic drivers that can build new partnership opportunities across the Americas. And I will answer with this. From the perspective of the Barbados Chamber, we feel that the private sector plays a crucial role in supporting and accelerating connections among cities and regions within the OAS member states to expand economic linkages in trade, investment, and innovation. And this is actively facilitated by trade missions, and we have shared this example, organizations leaders across the Americas. And this can foster the relationships that is necessary to lead new businesses and opportunities. As I said at the opening welcome reception, it takes businesses moving from behind their desk and actually going into markets through trade missions to form relationships, because you know what, trade begins with relationships. And I know ACE is one platform that certainly has that remedy in terms of facilitating us coming together, making the necessary connections. I also would like to say that we have to promote public partnerships, public-private partnerships, and we feel that the private sector can collaborate with governments to develop critical infrastructure projects, enhance digital connectivity, and invest in e-commerce platforms, which are critical and essential for efficient cross-border trade and enabling small and medium-sized enterprises to access international markets. I will say finally that key economic drivers that can build new partnerships across the Americas will definitely include and has to include technological innovation and digital transformation, where we can have collaboration in areas like fintech, renewable energy technologies, and sustainable development that will certainly allow for mutual growth and development across our shared countries and across the challenges in the climate that we face currently. So I end by just saying that this trade mission and the MOU has served as a catalyst for deepening trade and economic cooperation between Barbados and Panama, but we feel that it is a model for the OAS member states because the partnership exemplified for us how bilateral agreements can accelerate regional integration. So the final slide really captures for us, next slide please, and final, what we feel are some of the recommendations that we'd like to share with you, and you have the slide, that we just feel that we had a test case, we had an MOU, we had a framework, we executed by focusing on our measurable outcomes and how we can look at harmonizing and building capacity and strengthening the bilateral relations between two countries. And we hope to, we remain committed certainly to this. We believe it's a start for Barbados and Panama, but we remain committed to working collectively to advancing on the shared objectives that can address the challenges our two countries face. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Loban-Clark, for your presentation and for sharing your experience in promoting resilience and business collaboration in the Caribbean, especially the example that you have of best practices in building bridges between Barbados and Panama as a very valuable result when it comes to consolidating national capacities and also in the exchange of information and strengthening of the value chain. Now, let's move on to the next point, which is an opportunity for questions and answers of the invited guests. I would like to take advantage and recognize the permanent representatives of Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Peru, Paraguay, and Colombia. Thank you very much for being here with us, illustrious ambassadors, and we're going to open up an opportunity now. We're going to open up the floor. We would like to remind you to use the 3 minutes that you have been given. We can begin with anybody who would like to ask for the floor. Right now, we have Honduras. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Good morning to everybody. Thanks to the Secretary for also including inviting the experts to talk about this very important topic. My question is for Nathan. Good morning, Nathan, in English.
On this effort that I know you and your organization is making on bridging the expertise of economic development agencies with Latin America. I've followed the agency for some time, and I've recognized that effort that you are making. I'm interested in knowing what when we have your base cases of interactions between economic development agencies in the U.S. and the Latin America's counterparts? What has worked well? What makes those agencies come closer and work? And on the other hand, what is it that doesn't work? Because in this sense, and this question is in my case as what is it that we can make as member states to make this collaboration easier and for it to have a broader and a better impact? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question, first of all, and it's great to see you again. For us, as we think about the collaboration happening among and between areas across the Americas, a couple of things come to mind that make it really successful. One are true engagements that are really focused on collaboration. How do we learn from one another and recognize that we have things to learn from one another? That is not always the easiest thing, but where you've got entities, institutions that are truly focused on collaboration and can build small. So you have to start with really small steps. What are things that you can work on and collaborate on, learn from one another with, in a small way that will lead to deeper trust and building a relationship. So it always starts small for us. The second piece, I think, is an actual understanding that there are things that are very similar, but also very distinct differences among places. And so coming into those conversations with that recognition that there are similarities that bring us all together and differences that also make the challenges and opportunities slightly different. What has made it difficult in our experience, number one, is where there's not a recognition of benefit to both parties. So where you don't have folks from both sides of the conversation coming together to learn, where it's one trying to help maybe dictate what is happening without a real understanding of the cultural implications in a different place. Where you're not willing to truly build collaboration, that you're there for a one-time conversation as opposed to several conversations that will evolve into a relationship and eventually a partnership. So it is about trust building, it is around cultural competencies and understanding the differences, recognizing and lifting one another up in those, and finding ways to start small to build big.
Thank you very much, Mr. O. Your reply is very interesting. The question was as well. Now let's give the floor to the Ambassador Chile. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thanks also to the panelists who educated us this morning. It's really interesting to see the duality of the perspectives because these are global phenomena. We're talking about also climate change and the migratory flows. But we also have to look at this from the local standpoint. So do you know cases of local economic adaptation to economic phenomena like migratory flows or crisis change that we can look at with more detail? Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Ambassador, is there any panelists that you would like to address your question to, or for everybody? For anybody who would like to take the question, well then let's open the floor for any volunteers who might like to reply to that question. Let's begin with Mr. O. He's very enthusiastic. Mr. O.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a really important one. For us, both the impacts of climate change and migration are hitting every community, quite frankly, across the Americas. There is difficulty in different countries and their perspectives on migration, for example, but for what we have seen, in particular on the climate change issue, is that we're seeing historic storms, 500-year storms, 1,000-year storms hitting every other year in some cases in many places. And so the focus on both the initial mitigation efforts before a storm, but also the impacts of long-term economic recovery on the places that are hit by storms have made huge impacts on these communities. And in some cases, they're able to build back, in some cases, they're not. One of the things that we've spent a lot of time on climate smart economic development in particular. We have a toolkit that we'd be happy to share with this group that is focused on how do you build on the front end before a storm hits all the way through the economic recovery efforts. And how do you think about those recovery efforts, not just building back to what was, but building to the future of what needs to be in those places and finding ways to learn from one another. So whether that's flooding in the southeast here in the United States or whether that's storms hitting throughout Central or South America, being willing to learn from one another and thinking about the future impacts of storms and how do you mitigate against those so that you're not just building back to what was before climate impacts, but ensuring that you're building the resilience and a sustainable approach.
Muchísimas.
Thank you very much for the question and for the reply. Perhaps I'd like to ask the panelists to put your camera on, just in case you might want to answer one of the questions. Ms. Rubin?
Question, I think it's highly relevant. The question on migrant flows, I'm going to sidestep a little bit because I think it's less looking at specific places, but where we saw really successful examples of local integration linked with local economic development was in relation to the flow of Ukrainian refugees in Europe. We saw a lot of cities really stepping up and bringing together different actors across the public, private, and social economy sectors to welcome those refugees, move very quickly on integration, very quickly on housing, very quickly on basic needs. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from that experience with that specific migration flow. In terms of the question on places that are doing particularly well in terms of the climate challenges, again, I would point to the example I spoke to a little bit earlier, thinking about Malmö in Sweden and this kind of greater Copenhagen economic area. They've done a lot of interesting work looking both at how they can kind of lead sustainability in their own communities, thinking around things like transport and infrastructure, but have also really transformed themselves into a regional hub for green innovation and green patenting. So we released a recent report looking at kind of where the green innovation hubs across the OECD, and the greater Copenhagen region really stood out in terms of leadership, in terms of green innovation. So that's an example I would look to as well.
Thank you very much for that such a nice contribution to the discussion. Perhaps Madam Mirsha, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, I'm going to address the climate. Thank you, Ambassador. On the issue of climate change and what we're doing, I'm currently in Dubai, and I had to make a presentation on how it's the chamber helping or SMEs in Barbados in terms of climate and disaster resilience. And one of the things that we have to do is to ensure that when we look at climate resilience, we have to do, it has to be done on an integrated approach. And we have to explore these kind of integrated disaster resilience initiatives. How are we going to integrate these in terms of our emergency responses or infrastructure adoption, and looking specifically at climate risk management? And this has to be done by collaborative and in a holistic approach. So in the case of Barbados and how the Chamber works with the National Disaster Emergency Authority and international disaster organizations like the UNDRR, we're currently looking at how can we build capacity, and so there are 3 initiatives that we're undertaking. To one, assisting in our companies to integrate risk management and disaster crisis management, and certainly climate change resilience, whether it is through BCP planning, because it's one of the things that we found during COVID when we did our COVID impact studies, and we realized that so many of our businesses, because their SMEs were impacted and they were not able to necessarily pivot because of the fact that they didn't have risk management plans or BCP plans. So we have to look at the resilience framework and integrate that within how both at the national level and at business level, whether we're building in infrastructure resilience as well as business enterprise resilience as well as infrastructure resilience. I hope my contribution has helps in some way to answer the question.
Very useful. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Let's give the floor to Panama now. That's requesting the floor for another question. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I would like to congratulate the panelists and the panelists who are kind enough to be with us this morning. And let me also ask Mrs. Loban Clark, who's with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for speaking about your experience with Panama. This is the result of the vision of our country, that is to work more with our alliances with the Caribbean countries, and some of the results of the APES that recently took place in Panama, where we signed some MOUs and we got closer to getting to the main point of this meeting, connecting subnational connections. And I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to ask Mrs. Loban Clark, from her standpoint, from the standpoint of the Chamber of Commerce of Barbados, how do you see the role of public-private partnerships in the connection between cities from the standpoint of the insular countries? Thank you very much.
Madam Loban Clark, can you request the floor, please? Buenas tardes, tal vez, buenos días.
Well, good afternoon, that is to say good morning. We'd like to ask the panelists, Mr. Loban Clark, to ask for the floor. You have the floor, madam. Microphone, please.
You are on mute.
I am on mute. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think I spoke to it somewhat earlier in my final presentation when I spoke to the partnerships that I think we can build together. So I spoke about the public-private partnerships that we feel that can drive the regional integration and cooperation. But I did speak to the fact that we have to certainly harmonize the regulations between the public and the private sector in terms of how we work together, how we promote the public partnerships, how we collaborate with governments to build those. It does take an integrated approach, and I think what we have to do is build the kind of relationships and trust between governments and the private sector that will facilitate an environment of transparency and openness. And that's, I think, has to be the beginning of or the foundation that we have to build. And then, and in order to then look at how we work together to enhance regional cooperation and strengthen the trade relations between our different countries.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that very useful contribution. Y vamos a continuar con espacio de preguntas y respuestas.
And now we will have time for Q&A. Does anyone have any further questions before we move on to the next item? I think Paraguay, please, is recognized. Thank you very much. Honestly, I'm not very sure about this question, so I'm hesitating just a little bit. But after hearing the panelists, Ms. Rubin, who talked about local governments and the importance of working alongside local governments to develop these projects, the development projects. I apologize for the redundancy, says the speaker. And often around the world, in various regions, we have seen that local governments are very weak. There is effort to decentralize in some countries, but local governments continue to be extremely weak, and often they are not capable of acting as a counterpart for a project like this, for economic development, trade, something like that. And I imagine that obviously first we need to strengthen local governments in order to be able to develop these programs. But I'd like to hear from the panelists if they have any experience on this and how to address this kind of situation of wanting to develop a local project but having to deal with an extremely weak local government. I imagine that you would then have to work with a national government or possibly subnational in that case. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Since you did mention Ms. Rubin, I'd like to ask if she would like to speak to that, or if we should open the floor to other panelists as well that would like to take part. Ms. Rubin, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. A very relevant question. We see this issue a lot. It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg issue. They need the experience to be able to build the capacities, but they need the capacities to be able to make good use of the experience. A couple of ways that we've seen this addressed in OECD countries is one thing that we see is what we call asymmetrical decentralization. So you don't give the same powers to all local governments across the countries, but you kind of stage it based on the local governments that are already or ambitious enough to take on those additional powers. So that allows for a little bit more kind of stepwise approach. Another thing that we see is kind of these types of programs that are paired with capacity building for local governments, whether that's training for them or whether that's actually taking staff from national governments and seconding them or kind of putting them directly in local governments to work for a period of years to help build those capacities. And I think Nathan probably has some experience with similar approaches through his economic recovery core that he discussed a little bit. But it is a challenge, and a challenge that we see in OECD countries as well. And the final thing I would say, it's also about understanding what's the right level of the subnational government to take on these projects, because sometimes it doesn't need a very local or city or municipal approach, but rather a regional or state level approach. And in those cases, the regional or state government might be the more appropriate counterpart. But a very relevant question. I don't have any magic answers because I think it's something that countries across the world struggle with, to be very frank.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. We'd also like to give the floor to Mr. Oli, who can also refer to that question.
Thank you very much for the question. It's something that we think about quite often in our work. Part of both the beauty and the challenge of economic development is that it's done with different types of entities and organizations, sometimes local or state government, sometimes federal, sometimes it's a nonprofit or NGO economic development organization, sometimes it is a public-private partnership. One of the things that we focus on, particularly to your question of capacity for local governments, is the Economic Recovery Corps. That is specifically focused on helping to build capacity at entities and organizations of all sizes and types. So some of our economic development fellows are in local government entities, both county and municipal governments here in the United States. Some are in public-private partnerships. Some are in what we would call entrepreneurial support organizations. Some are in nonprofit NGOs. The beauty of this program is that we've got cohorts, small groups of those folks learning alongside one another. So maybe there's a group of 8 local government institutions that are hosting these fellows. They're learning as a small cohort of 8. So they're learning alongside one another, sharing the challenges that they're seeing, the opportunities they're experiencing, and learning alongside one another. They're also getting specific training based on the type of organization they are, so they can better understand what their role is in economic development, how to build that capacity, and to make sure that we're equipping them and their team with the right skills and expertise. We're doing that in every different type of organization that we are hosting those fellows within, and we're making sure that we're building training according to the type of organization and the role they might play in economic development. So it is truly about building capacity in those types of entities and organizations, but also recognizing that in different places, economic development is run by different types of organizations. So maybe if the local government institution is not strong in a place, maybe you lean more heavily on the public-private partnership or on the NGO. Maybe the federal government has to play a larger role. But focus on building long-term capacity for all of those types of entities creates a real opportunity regionally and locally for those institutions to really drive economic opportunity.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ole. And I think with this, we can conclude this phase of questions. Colombia, please, you are recognized, and then we'll hear from Mexico. Please go ahead.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all, ladies and gentlemen. Having heard the panelists whose interventions we are very grateful for. And thank you for sharing your knowledge on this topic. And I think that all of us support the idea of PPPs. They have been highly successful. And my question is whether it would be important or whether it's time to pay maximum attention to the recommendations of the experts on climate change, because I seem to understand that some of the concerns and responses have suggested that we need to be looking at how we're going to address the tragedies that are looming on the horizon, given the urgency. Of course, this is a way of looking at climate change, but we now find ourselves facing a climate emergency, and we're looking down the road at a climate collapse. And so I'd like to ask if we should wait for these phenomena to actually happen, and this human displacement, the creation of higher levels of hunger, which we are already facing, particularly in our part of the hemisphere, in Latin America, or if rather we should start to choose to change the way that we use our energy, to stop depending on fossil fuels like gas and oil, but rather we should look into the production of clean energy, green energy. Start putting as much effort as possible into what we can produce with water, wind, sun, and wind energy, for example, in order to, as much as possible, try to avoid creating more pollution, CO2 emissions into the atmosphere. I would be very grateful if the panelists could please answer me why we don't look at a way to shift the tides when it comes to the way that we produce food in the fields of the Americas, in order to keep this in mind as we address the issue of hunger, while also trying to be much more tied into the rural organizations, indigenous and Afro-descendant communities, as those who truly are the caregivers of the earth, because certainly that it will give us what we need to address hunger. And this is a concern that I have for any of the panelists. Thank you very much, Chair.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your question and your reflection. Mr. Oleg can answer your questions.
Thank you very much for the question. It's maybe the most critical question of our time in my mind. I think we have to take an all of the above approach. We certainly have to be helping communities think about recovery as they are impacted by these events, but we also have to be thinking about proactive approaches to make sure that we don't further exacerbate these issues. We need to make sure communities are not only prepared, but that they're doing things from an economic development perspective to try and help change as much as possible to mitigate against these. So for me, that is economic diversification strategies, that is ensuring that we're building long-term economic development strategies that reinvest in the community, both in the environment, but the community itself. And we also need to recognize that economic development is also now touching issues around housing, around climate impacts in their communities, around childcare, around workforce development. And so economic development, while typically in the past may not have participated as actively in these initiatives, it is now being impacted by every one of those initiatives. And so showing up and being a part of those conversations, making sure that as you're providing opportunities, whether that is incentives for companies to grow and expand in your community, or whether you're focused on really building from within, whether it's agriculture in rural places, whether it is small business growth, that we are taking an all-above approach to try and drive and ensure that we can mitigate those impacts in the long term, as well as thinking about the long-term impacts of those communities as they are impacted by those storms.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ole. Now, I also have some questions, but I think that they have been broadly addressed in our debate here, and I'll open for one final comment from the panelists who are with us virtually, if they would like to share any reflections.
En caso de que no sea.
If that is not the case, then we can move on. I'd like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank all of the panelists. Ms. Rubin does want to make a final comment. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just quickly on the last point for Colombia, because I think it's a really important one. And here at the OECD, we're really trying to address the climate crisis from multiple angles, thinking about it in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economic development, in terms of skills, in terms of resilience and disaster preparedness. We have work looking at indigenous communities, on rural communities. So it is something we're really trying to take a holistic perspective to. But I think what your point really raised is that there's an inherent uncertainty and a lot of unknowns right now. We don't know what the future is going to look like in terms of climate. We don't know what it's going to look like in terms of AI, generative AI, in terms of migration flows. And so what we're seeing in a lot of the economic development communities that we work with is more focus on kind of futures thinking and around strategic foresight. So how do you plan when you're planning for uncertainty? So you don't know what's going to happen. How do you have kind of multiple scenarios in mind? How do you have multiple pathways that you might be able to take? And so I think that's something really important for us to think about as we're thinking about kind of what's next in economic development, is this strategic foresight and integrating more futures capacities into our work. And I just want to close by thanking you for this opportunity. It's been a really enriching discussion for us at the OECD, and I hope it's the start of continued collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Rubin. And now the floor to Madam Loven-Clark.
Thank you very much. I'd like to just say that, and it goes to the last question, continue to navigate as small island developing states, what we call the poly crisis. And I say that we cannot navigate the issues of climate change without also looking at, as we look at economic cooperation, as we look at strengthening economic trade, we cannot do so without looking at how they impact on our climate. And therefore, we do really have to, as the representative from Costa Rica said, we have to really look at and begin to speak in one language and speak together. We have to collaborate in partnership, and we can only take the kind of actions that we need to do if we work together, if we listen to each other, because it has to take public and private sectors working together hand in hand to ensure that we can effectively enhance and drive our economies, while at the same time ensuring that we're prepared in terms of whatever future the future holds for us in terms of climate crisis. They will come, but again, it is how we prepared. So we have to stay prepared and be prepared as economies and as businesses, and we cannot look through one lens, as I heard one of my fellow panelists said. We really do have to look through multiple lenses and look at multi-sectoral partnerships, multi-sectoral approaches. And I just want to end by saying thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you, but also to learn from you as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to give the floor for the final comments to Mr. Oil.
Just want to thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. And another example to the question earlier of local governments and the partnerships that exist or need to exist. Everyone in this room is a partner. We at IDC partner closely with OECD. Misha and I met 3 years ago, and we have continued to engage. We have a formal MOU with the Organization for American States. We firmly believe at IDC and within the economic development community that those partnerships are critical to making good work happen and good results happen at the local, regional, and international levels. And so I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be today, but also to just recognize that there are partnerships all the way across this room to build on, and many new partnerships to build on as a result as well. So thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And on that positive note, we will close this Q&A session. I don't know if the panelists can join us for the next section for dialogue with the member states, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for having taken the time to be with us today and for sharing your very valuable perspectives today on how to strengthen subnational competitiveness in order to drive competitiveness and development in the Americas. This is such a relevant topic for this council, for CD, and it asks us to analyze public policies, collaboration between the public and private sector, as we have heard, as well as practices that bolster local capacities, and how that can also be a contribution to more inclusive and sustainable development. We greatly value your contributions, and we hope to continue working with you closely in this very important effort. Thank you very much. Now we will open the floor for dialogue with member states. And first we have Mexico requesting the floor. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Gracias, Presidenta. Muchas.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for their interventions. Mexico recognizes the right of all individuals to mobilize in conditions of efficiency, safety, accessibility, in guaranteeing equal opportunities and improved living conditions, as well as connectivity, particularly for those who have been most vulnerable historically. Today we're talking about competitiveness and infrastructure development, transportation, communications, with a very special focus on the social aspect. Thank you very much for discussing the relevance of cities as key drivers of sustainable development and a place where 80% of the population in our region lives, as well as their growing internationalization and the cross-cutting path they take as global stakeholders. We are looking at human settlements and how they have placed local governments at the very heart of our global concerns. Against this backdrop, the federal government of Mexico has been driving greater competitiveness and efficiency in our international actions alongside these governments, and we have a program for the internationalization of Mexican cities. The aim of this is to contribute to linking state and municipal level governments with various stakeholders in the international stage, as well as horizontal cooperation. Among other activities and meetings, we can highlight from our program over the last year, the Forum on Labor Mobility, Mexico-Canada, Michoacan edition for the dissemination of information on mobility program in Canadian mobility programs, and the regional workshop on international cooperation activities in the Southeast held in Cancun, Quintana Roo, the first Ibero-American conference on fair, sustainable tourism, also held in Cancun, and the forum Local Diplomacy as a tool for the localization of global development agendas on the path toward the International Summit of Habita, Latin America and the Caribbean 2024, held in Mexico City last April. Mexico also drives interinstitutional agreements with a focus on cooperation and development, and this indicates the interest of our subnational governments in participating in activities abroad. For example, the city maintenance, the city cooperation agreements with other countries. In July 2024, we registered 34 interinstitutional agreements, of which 15 were signed by decentralized municipalities, federal entities, and 23, that is 60%, by municipal governments. The main link would be with the United States with 42%, followed by Latin American and Caribbean countries with 24%. signing instruments with European countries was 16%, and with international organizations 26%, and with the region Asia Pacific, that has also been a significant percent. Local Mexican governments held 19 in-person working visits with an emphasis on North America, Europe, and Asia. And they continue to drive the diversification of local governments' agendas with our region. Mexico believes that in order to drive competitiveness at the subnational level, we need to shift to more inclusive models that once again focus on social well-being as a priority. We believe that solidarity and economic social justice is an alternative to the current system, and that is why we have driven production and sustainable programs based on cooperation, redistribution, self-management, and so citizens' participation, known as nuclei for driving inclusive solidarity. And this is part of a network to seek cooperation with local stakeholders while driving and implementing activities to promote the social solidarity economy. As of now, we have a national network with 260 nuclei. Then that includes over 1,600 organizations, 31% of which are made up of institutions, 42% with cooperative companies, 13% local governments, and the rest are other types of organizations. These nuclei are a key component to shifting our economic transformation in Mexico, as well as our social transformation, while strengthening our cooperation and compliance with the 2030 agenda, particularly the SDG number 11, which is with regard to sustainable communities and cities. In the international realm, we have been driving initiatives to promote competitiveness and subnational development. In 2023, we participated in a high-level forum on sustainable development, and in this framework, we held a parallel event entitled The Role of Cities in Implementing the 2030 Agenda in Latin America. On October 7th of this year, the UN Program for Human Settlements, UN Habita, held the International Day for the city in Querétaro, Mexico, where they addressed driving the new urban agenda and the SDGs in the 2030 agenda. As the chair of the UN Habita 2023-2024 chair, Mexico drove urban sustainable development as part of its agenda in driving human settlements through public policies, urban policies at the subnational level, and also promoting fora for dialogue with local governments and other stakeholders for a new urban agenda adapted to local needs. In March of 2024, my country hosted the joint meeting of the UN Habita board, where we led sessions on drafting the strategic plan for 2026-2029 for UN Habita, and also shared our vision for building inclusive cities that are sustainable and resilient, with people at the very heart of their development, and certainly as one of their main priorities. On the Inter-American stage in 2023, Mexican cities took part in the Cities Summit in Denver, Colorado. This was as part of our commitments from the LA 2022 Summit of the Americas. At that time, the then head of government of Mexico City and current president of the Republic, Claudia Sheinbaum, inaugurated the panel Accelerating Investment for Climate Investment in Cities, and she shared the Climate Change Environment Program for Mexico City, which included a public transportation system that reduced its emissions as a project for social justice. Against this backdrop, Mexico City was awarded by the OAS in the category Innovation in promoting gender equality, diversity, and human rights approach for the police development plan with a gender perspective in the Secretariat of Citizen Security in city governments. Mexico also took part frequently in exchanges on competitiveness in the Americas at the OAS. Chair, promoting development from local government is a guarantee of social inclusion and also a driver to effectively move forward with the 2030 agenda. At the same time, it promotes the distribution of benefits, economic development between citizens and other subnational stakeholders in the country and the region. Cooperation for development and exchanging experiences for greater physical connectivity is one effective path toward achieving a more competitive, sustainable, resilient, and above all, inclusive region. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Ambassador. Now we give the floor to Brazil. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Also, thank you to the panelists who shared their experiences, which are very relevant to us. Brazil believes that subnational competitiveness is increasingly important in an interconnected world, and that is why we need inclusive, sustainable government. Building cities and regions is part of our strategy to drive innovation and production at the local and global scale. With the largest economy in Latin America, we have many practices that can be shared at the inter-American level if others are interested, and we have projects with a high impact on inclusive cities, building entrepreneurship, as well as success stories in providing more advantageous connections for our cities. The Ministry of Cities at the federal level was created in 2023, and among its competencies includes promoting an urban development policy, contributing to more sustainable and inclusive cities, as well as city safety. We have been working to promote social participation, sustainable development, urban development, and others. I'd like to particularly highlight the My House, My Life program, which has provided 6,000 residences, and we aim to produce over 2 million by 2026. Chair, it's also worth noting the value of public policies focused on driving innovation. The dynamic that we observe right now with technology and innovation means that our policies are essential if we are going to harness this technology and create better cities in Brazil. And I can share the success story in Florianopolis, for example, where we see a large increase in tourism as well as decades of technological development and startups. Today, technology is over 20% of that city's GDP, and we see a fourfold increase in tourism. We see over 13,000 new tech companies, and this is one of the cities with the largest number of startups in Brazil. The success strategy for economic diversification and federal programs add value and drive our public policies as we are building cities with an innovation ecosystem with pioneering courses and engineering, automation at the Federal University of Santa Catarina, for example. We have also been promoting innovation to help with technology transfer and working to assist tech companies in Brazil through these programs. The policies shared can be one example of best practices to share with the OAS and other member states if they are interested in hearing more. And once again, thank you very much to the panelists.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Brazil. The Ambassador Kreiser from Chile has the floor. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd also like to thank the panelists once again for the opening with which they broached the questions from member states. I think that's really crucial for dialogue. From Chile's standpoint, it seems that this topic, the capacity for development and cooperation in regions, not only defines things on the local level, but also boosts things for everything that we do in the entire region, in the hemisphere. Because in our opinion, when we talk about competitiveness and development of cities and regions, We're talking about decentralizing, sharing resources and power. And we feel that this is very important in such an unequal region as ours, both on the aggregate as well as, the disaggregated level as well as the national level. When you look at the differences and the marginal areas and the competitiveness and competitive areas which are farther from Santiago, this is imperative for more desegregated or deconcentrated area. There's also the social issue. Now, in Chile, Madam Chairman, we really don't have any other option. In 1948, almost a century ago, Benjamin Picasso wrote in his book, Chile is a crazy kind of geography. The people who are here with us knows that the poet said it's miraculous that we can reduce the planet to what this is. The snows and the last few times, the length of the country, no, maybe Chile has the most incredible topography of the planet. But from that standpoint, it's really imperative to think about the subnational scale when we talk about development, as we have spoken about in this session that we're grateful for, and which is very opportune. It's very timely. So what have we been learning? What have we been getting out of all of this work? There's still a lot of ground to cover, but the region still needs tools to promote development. And we're talking about skills building on the local level, the skills building on the subnational level, and only that way it's possible to design and then execute more projects that are aligned with the people that live in each and every one of these areas. So along that line, then, international cooperation is crucial, as the three panelists have said. And it's also crucial to have and share valuable experiences in terms of learning about local governments and sustainable development. So in this context, then, in a globalized world, one with a lot of technology, I think it's more relevant to digitize economies on a subnational level. And so along that line, we would like to share fiber optic technologies. This is one of the projects that the Lakes region of the south of Chile has been able to digitize local commerce and local trade and been able to sell agricultural and fisheries products. We feel that this is a model that might be further developed and replicated. Now, this requires, like so many other things, not to get into the dichotomy between the state and the private sector. No, we're talking about public and private areas and companies here that are in keeping with the reality. And this is one of the topics that goes over the three different topics that we've heard today, to have a strategic plan, data, and this is crucial. This is what Anna Rubin said in terms of looking at the data more than the national averages. We feel that this is really crucial. And the issues of the three, to share that data, to have specific, updated, and accessible information. That is the key, in our opinion, to execute projects, especially in isolated areas of the south of Chile. The satellite data information is very clear in remote areas, providing that there's connectivity where the gaps are more significant. Now, to conclude, I know that we have a limit in our talking time, but I think it's relevant to not overlook that competitiveness is also has to be sustainable and inclusive, otherwise we can't get ahead. So that when you make investment in development projects, it's crucial to think about how we can have these economic benefits get to all the sectors, young people, women, indigenous communities, rural areas, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for your comments, Ambassador. Now let's give the floor to the Ambassador from Peru. Madam Chairman, Peru truly appreciates the Inter-American Council for Integral Development and for choosing this very relevant and very timely issue, such as connecting cities and regions of the Americas to increase competitiveness. The cities and regions are spaces where you've got economic, social, and cultural dynamic that converges, and it defines the future of our cities. They generate more than 80% of the world GDP and are key hubs for innovation, entrepreneurship, and creative enterprises. Nonetheless, there are significant challenges such as growing costs and overcrowdedness. So in this context, it's really imperative to strengthen subnational areas so that we can have more sustainable and well-balanced economies in our Americas. To do this, the delegation of Peru feels that it's crucial to bear in mind the following aspects. Public policies have to respond to national priorities as well as be in keeping with local realities. Local governments and regional governments have to have dialogue platforms that allows them to coordinate their needs on the national scale. Synergies amongst cities and regions go beyond borders. In the context of the OAS, we have to promote and strengthen spaces such as the American Competitive Network so that we can exchange good practices and promote transnational initiatives. And then finally, all strategies for subnational competitiveness have to integrate environmental sustainability and social inclusion as their cross-cutting issues. Now, this meeting is a very valuable opportunity to share experiences and identify common challenges and move ahead with an hemispheric agenda that will allow us to know and connect our cities and regions, promoting inclusive and sustainable development. The delegation of Peru reiterates its commitment with the objectives of this council and is ready to actively cooperate to build a more integrated and competitive region. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Embajador Sardón, por su intervención.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your comments. Honduras has the floor. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. This topic takes me back to the years that I worked in the Secretariat, where I was privileged enough to work with the competitiveness team. I would say this was with the Forum of Competitiveness of the Americas that I had a chance to work with this team and to put the subnational competitiveness team together. That's what we're talking about. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to offer some history as to the reasons why at a given point in time these opportunities were created for member states, because today they're still very pertinent. And now, as you know, the Competitiveness Forum is a wonderful forum that brings together the highest authorities of competitiveness, trade, and economic development in the region. And it's done this very well for quite some time now. But precisely now, where our nature as a hemispheric organization with national representativeness is there, we understand that there's a very significant gap in terms of public policies. And this gap has to do with the subnational authorities. That's where it is. Now, in the case of the federal government and the governors, the mayors, and other public authorities, we're not necessarily getting to them when it comes to the Secretariat's work. And that's how this experts working group for national competitiveness burgeons. Originally, they met more on topics for conciliation or reconciliation of indicators, and what you cannot measure, you cannot correct. And we recognize that there's a big gap when it comes to what we're measuring and what we're comparing amongst all the cities and all the regions in the Americas. Now, many of them found within the group that there was a lot of support because in their own countries, perhaps they didn't have any equivalent or didn't have a counterpart with whom to work. In a typical case, for example, in cases like Mexico and Argentina, where we have to compare the major metropolis of Buenos Aires or Mexico City, and many of these cities found their counterparts in this forum, yes, where it dealt with, or they dealt with size or many other similarities, but they also shared many of the barriers and a lot of the challenges that they had in terms of the port cities, and then they shared these headaches, the port headaches, because they were in a place where they had to come up with some kind of public policy Jutex in Panama, and the same thing happened in Peru, where the universities found an area or an opportunity to cooperate, and then it expanded public and private sectors. All of this, by the way, is part and parcel of this initiative. So this is one of the biggest virtues of these workspaces, which are within the basin, all the productive areas, are sitting around a table to come up with solutions and find solutions such as some of the programs that we're suggesting. At the time, the working group had at least 3 guiding principles. One, making business easier. This could also be called deregulation, because they understood that there was an excessive amount of red tape that had to be dealt with and addressed because it limited business. Once again, a new department of government efficiency. It's not so new after all, right? But this is an issue that was dealt with here. And one of the main topics was, for example, construction permits. And as we all well know, Madam Chairman, the issue of construction led to one of the largest governance crises in the country, because we're talking about corruption. You had a big company that tried to circumvent or bypass the red tape and the regulations, and then they had to speed up the processes, and this led to a democratic crisis in many countries, so that what seemed to be an isolated issue in the productive areas or sectors, no, it's really a critical issue for the governance of our countries, in point of fact. So this is a topic that has taken up a lot of time. Methodology, well, as was said, what you can't measure, you can't correct, and then digital transformation. I mention all of this, Madam Chair, because these topics continue to be very relevant, as they were 10 years ago when the working group was even set up. So if we go back to the simple fact of the future and governance and artificial intelligence in the region, well, here, this is a space, an opportunity, where our institutions are representative to talk about the issue. Now, during COVID, where our countries saw dark times, it took us by surprise. We were flat-footed. We didn't have any reference guide at the time. The organization was there. The organization was there, and through this working group, it presented a report at the time which called Economic Recovery Through Digital Transformation for Latin America and the Caribbean, precisely when it was most needed, when we didn't exactly know what we had to do, and nor did we know how to get to the digital transformation for our countries. So this was led by Mr. Chinacho, your compatriot, Madam Chair, who's now Secretary General of ECLAC, and we have a sister organization to deal with these topics. So in the interest of time, let me just say, Madam Chairman, that this is really of great value in the case of Honduras in particular. This was an opportunity, a space where academia found very important alliances and partnerships, and this could have a quantitative effect in terms of education in Honduras. The same thing happened with the private sector through private sector organization, when they met up with a lot of different parents, a lot of programs were done, and where they got together with the government and they met their counterparts. Now, the reason for the success, Mr. Ole mentioned this, and that is to set up opportunities, spaces for cooperation, which are permanent, where the stakeholders can continue to meet and talk about these issues, because there are a lot of things that pull us together. We have a lot of things in common, and despite the algorithms, they're always out there trying to look at the negative side of things, but it's opportunities such as these and spaces such as ACE, competitive exchange, which can help us deepen our relationships. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honduras. Thank you very much for your very valuable contributions. Now let's give the floor to Ambassador of Paraguay. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. We truly commend this topic for this session, connecting cities and regions of the Americas to strengthen subnational competitiveness. We're very aware of the relevance for economic development for our cities and regions. And also, I would like to say to the presenters that they gave very important and very interesting presentations. This exchange of experiences has been very interesting amongst countries, and to hear what other countries have done with regard to these kinds of programs. But with regards to Paraguay, the government have a lot of ability to promote regional development projects that provide fiscal incentives and training, as well as funding, particularly to improve competitiveness, innovation of micro, small, and medium-sized companies, the SMEs. Here, my delegation would like to look at some of the details and offer some of our experiences, and to point out that we feel that the regions should actively participate in pulling together data and analysis and needs to develop national policies, and they should identify key areas that boost economic growth and local competitiveness. As to the question of governments and their plans that are in keeping with the realities of each region, and do this through a consultation, adaptation, and a participatory approach, which involves all local actors and the SMEs. We would also like to underscore the importance of hemispheric dialogue in this issue, because member states, we can promote sister city networks and interregional networks to share knowledge and propel economic development programs that strengthen the SMEs and the PMEs in the region. Now, in the case of our country, let me just underscore that the Vice Minister of the SMEs of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce has undertaken various strategic initiatives to strengthen the sector of the small, medium-sized, and micro-enterprises, considering their crucial importance in the economy of the country, with a standpoint of training and competitiveness and access to financing and formalization of access to the internal market as well as the international market. This Vice Ministry works to empower entrepreneurs throughout the entire regions, all the regions of the country. We have seen the positive impact of initiatives such as the support centers for entrepreneurs in 14 regions of the country, which aim to promote entrepreneurship on the local level, develop capacities and business knowledge, and strengthen the SMEs in the various regions. Of the services offered in these areas, we have administrative and necessary knowledge to formalize business, training programs in key areas such as management, finance, marketing, as well as strategic planning. Relevant data, access to tools, and resources that facilitate operations and growth of these companies is also looked at, and connections with clients, suppliers, and social partners to expand business opportunities. Another notable experience that Paraguay has in this area are the hubs for developing small companies. This is with the financial support of the USAID for international development and the technical mission from Taiwan. Currently, there are 3 different hubs in our country which are located in the main economic regions: the central region around Asunción and Tapua in the south of Paraguay, and the Alto de Paraná, which is more or less in the east of the country on the border with Brazil. Now, these hubs provide services such as business assistance, which is individualized, training and workshops, market research, planning, business planning and financial access, and strategic development and marketing and sales. On the other hand, I would also like to include the inclusion of SMEs through the value chain for Zero Hunger program, looking at our internal markets for public contracting and other comprehensive roundtables where we have an interaction between the accredited companies to provide food in schools in the framework of Zero Hunger, and other companies with local SMEs and family farm companies. Here we should like to also underscore some challenges that Paraguay has when it comes to building competitiveness for the SMEs in different departments and cities. Here it is important to point out that there is a regional inequality because some regions which are less developed have less access to infrastructure, less access to financing and training, which limits growth of these SMEs. The high informality of the SMEs, particularly in the rural areas, that affects their access to finance and fiscal benefits and trade networks and technological transformation, digitalization, in as much as there are gaps in technological adaptation and digitalization, particularly amongst the SMEs in the rural areas. All of these things limit their ability to compete in global markets. So along that line, then, the delegate from Paraguay would like to urge the OAS through its various secretariats, agencies, and bodies, such as Trust of the Americas, to continue to work to provide resources so that we can address these challenges, thus strengthening competitiveness of the SMEs in all of the regions of our countries. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Muchísimas gracias, señor embajador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Florentin. Let's give the floor to the United States. The United States has the floor.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair, for providing a forum to discuss this important topic. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the distinguished panelists who have delivered great presentations on the significant role cities play in our hemispheres and the need to improve connectivity between cities to make our countries more competitive and productive. My name is Daniel Ricchetti. I am the Deputy Special Representative for City and State Diplomacy at the State Department. My office, known as the Subnational Diplomacy Unit, or SDU, is headed by Ambassador Nina Chiggin, and we were created 2 years ago to lead the Department of State's efforts to engage with local leaders and to connect U.S. cities, states, and other local governments with their counterparts overseas. Since then, we have engaged with subnational leaders from across the United States, the Western Hemisphere, and the world. Cities and other localities are integral to the practice of foreign policy. This is particularly true in this hemisphere, which is the world's most urbanized region, with as much as 80% of the population living in urban areas. Mayors make many of the daily decisions that determine whether our democracies can deliver on the promises of services, security, and of course, economic opportunity. When the United States hosted the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles in 2022, we saw that the pandemic had exposed weaknesses in our region's health, economic, educational, and social systems, seriously challenging the gains we made in tackling poverty and inequality. In response, we understood that the region must work together to create more inclusive and equitable economies and address shared challenges, from bridging the digital divide to addressing the climate and pollution crises. Recognizing that national governments cannot do this alone, President Biden committed to hosting the first City Summit of the Americas in Denver, Colorado. This inaugural City Summit, which was a huge success and a great opportunity for mutual learning, it brought over 250 mayors and thousands of other local, civic, and community leaders from across the hemisphere, the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean, to discuss how we can tackle together these shared challenges at the local level. The discussions we had in Denver highlighted just how much cities in this region are leading the way. It provided underrepresented voices and local leaders new to diplomacy the opportunity to share their ideas and experiences with an audience that included mayors and local stakeholders from every country in the Americas. Looking forward, the United States is committed to elevating local voices in every aspect of our work in the hemisphere, as we did at the first City Summit. And as we look to the 10th Summit of the Americas and beyond, we hope the City Summit in Denver was just the first of many City Summits to come. The United States is working to improve connectivity in and between cities in the hemisphere. One of the ways we're doing this is through our Cities Forward program, which has paired 12 U.S. cities with 12 from Latin America and the Caribbean. Through peer-to-peer learning, capacity building, and technical assistance, the 12 city pairs are advancing key development projects that help make their cities more sustainable and resilient, while building equitable and inclusive economic opportunities. My team also compiled a green finance guide for Cities Forward cities, which we look forward to launching early next year. While we started with just 24 cities, we plan to share our findings throughout the hemisphere so that we can take everything learned through this program and scale it upwards. In addition to supporting Cities Forward, my team has convened local democracy forums where we bring together local officials from the United States and partner countries for peer-to-peer best practice exchanges and learning with key stakeholders. Our next forum will take place in Lima, Peru. These local democracy forums have been a great platform for local leaders to exchange on anything from trade and investment to energy to citizen engagement. We also regularly support exchanges between local leaders on topics that range from environmental conservation and resilience to promoting economic development and investment. My team knows how much local leaders have to offer. We listen to them and we learn from them at the State Department daily. However, we are also well aware that local leaders balance many different demands beyond foreign policy and can often struggle with international engagement. To help overcome this barrier, we started a new program for U.S. cities called the Lewis Local Diplomats Initiative, which places State Department colleagues in city or state level governments to help offices, mayors, county officials, governors, etc., to help with their international engagement as we're discussing today. And last but not least, the United States looks forward to the participation of the region's leaders on competitiveness in the upcoming America's Competitiveness Exchange, which will be occurring in Illinois from April 27th to May 2nd next year. This program is supported by the U.S. Department of Commerce and the U.S. Department of State. Chair, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to discuss the critical role cities play in making our economies and region more competitive and the ways in which we are supporting cities in this effort. My delegation, my office, myself, look forward to continuing the dialogue on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dujurki, to represent the United States of America and for your very valuable comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Dujurki. Now let's give the floor to the delegation of Costa Rica. You have the floor. Thank you very much. I apologize, Madam Chairman. But let me just go ahead and say, distinguished colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the floor on behalf of my own delegation. It's an honor to address you and to share Costa Rica's commitment to improve regional and national competitiveness as part of our national strategy for economic development and regional integration. We're progressing in modernizing our port infrastructure, particularly in the Caldera port on the Pacific coast. With the support of financial international cooperation, we have launched international initiatives for $100 million aimed at revitalizing the port. Now, this project includes building new centers and containers and modern facilities. This will increase our capacity of more than 900 ships, and we'll have 11 million tons of cargo capacity. Now, these efforts seek not only to improve efficiency and reduce the time to get in merchandise, but will strengthen the economy of our regions and our cities. In keeping with the objectives of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, this will promote connectivity and boost exchange and make the country more competitive in international trade. We, of course, do have to tackle challenges given the obsolescence of our infrastructure, but with this project, we hope to overcome our constraints and have more equitable and efficient development. This will both help citizens as well as regional trade. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for giving me a chance to share this progress that we believe can serve as an example of how connectivity policies can strengthen economic development and inclusion in our Americas. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Muchas gracias, Delegación de Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. Now we'll give the floor to the delegation of the Bahamas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to the chair for convening today's CD meeting on the important topic of competitiveness and for the insightful presentations delivered by our distinguished panelists. Our meeting today takes place at a critical inflection point for our hemisphere. Most recently, at the COP in Azerbaijan, our countries once again collectively fell well short of forging global collaboration at the necessary ambition needed to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis, which undermines the capacity of states, big and small, to develop sustainably. Our hemisphere continues to grapple with the scourge of escalating violence and insecurity, driven by the trafficking of guns and drugs into and through our countries, alongside the prospect for enhanced challenges related to global trade and migration. Therefore, it will be even more imperative for our countries to prioritize fostering national and subnational competitiveness and the enabling environment and infrastructure to facilitate this as we chart our national, regional, and hemispheric course ahead. Throughout the Americas, our cities and subregions serve as both engines and the areas where the effects of these global challenges are most intensely experienced. The Bahamas is a nation of islands, each with its own unique challenges and opportunities. We understand acutely that a nation's strength lies not only in its capital region, but also in the distinctiveness, strength, and competitiveness of subnational regions. This is why, despite our small population of approximately 400,000 persons, in order to ensure citizens across the Bahamas have access to vital services, rights, and economic opportunity, our country continues to invest in maintaining more than 106 public health facilities, 160 public schools, and 20 airports which receive international flights scattered across our archipelago. While tourism and financial services remain our economic pillars, we also recognize the need for diversification through sustainability and innovation. In this regard, the Bahamas' National Development Plan, Vision 2040, and our national trade policy provide a roadmap for fostering economic resilience and inclusivity by creating opportunities for sustainable growth, enhancing trade, building economic and environmental resilience, and modernizing infrastructure. We believe that connectivity is not just a matter of transport and technology, but a reflection of how we link people, businesses, and communities to opportunities. The modernization of transport and digital infrastructure in the Bahamas, including the revitalization of Freeport Grand Bahama as a free trade zone and a regional transshipment and innovation hub, demonstrates our efforts to unlock the potential of our country's subregions. The Bahamas has also launched a national program, Innovate 242, focused on attracting global partners and spurring local prospects for scaling entrepreneurship and innovation in order to meet sustainable development challenges within the country. By linking our islands more effectively, integrating them into global value chains, and incentivizing entrepreneurship and innovation, we are laying the foundation for shared prosperity. While we wait for the realization of a more accessible, affordable, and adequately scaled global climate and development finance architecture, the Bahamas is also doing all we can to facilitate our sustainable economic development. The Bahamas has launched its Sustainable Investment Program, which is an innovative public-private partnership with local and global partners to mobilize ESG-compliant investments to meet our country's sustainable development and resilience-building needs. The Bahamas is open to sharing our experiences with the program, which could serve as a model for similar countries in the region. As I close, the Bahamas also lauds the OAS for its programs which support member states with enhancing national and subnational competitiveness, including the Inter-American Competitiveness Network and the ACE, the Americas Competitiveness Exchange. These collaborative vehicles offer essential opportunities to exchange successful practices, foster innovation networks, and create cohesive regional trade and development strategies. Domestically, initiatives like the Bahamas' Small Business Development Center, which has benefited from critical OAS support through the SBDC program, and the University of the Bahamas and Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute, offer robust opportunities to align resources with regional and international partners to advance workforce training, entrepreneurial support, and innovation. Chair and colleagues, the Bahamas stands ready to not only continue collaborating with colleague member states through these existing OAS programs, but also remains open to sharing its experiences, practices, and knowledge, particularly around our efforts in the blue and the green economy. Together, we believe we can ensure that our cities and regions are not just engines of growth, but also beacons of hope, progress, and sustainability. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. Delegación.
Thank you to the Bahamas, and now I recognize the distinguished ambassador from Argentina. Please go ahead. Thank you very much. I wasn't going to take the floor, but this is a fascinating topic, and I think that I can share some of our experience and the reforms underway in Argentina with regard to this discussion on competitiveness. Argentina has truly aimed at high-level boosting of competitiveness at every level. And in order to do that, we have deeply chosen simplifying the regulatory framework with labor standards, standards for international trade, the tax regime in general, in order to drive that competitiveness that we're all talking about today. It's well known that for all companies, it doesn't matter the size, whether they're multinationals or SMEs, they face not only national standards and taxes, but often, in many cases, depending on where their economic activity takes place, if we're talking about factories where they are located, the sector, then they face national tax regimes. And we have been working day in and day out, and we have been really focusing on deregulation and overcoming obstacles and hurdles to those sectors. But they also face province-level taxes, and in many cases, even municipal taxes and this goes in addition to regulations. In Argentina, the national government is making decisive steps every single day along these lines, and our provincial governments are also looking at how they can get their accounts in order to lower the province-level taxes, while also facilitating regulations and standards and making sure that they're in harmony with municipal and province-level standards. This makes us more effective in achieving development if we're able to mainstream the private sector. And certainly that is the sector that is creating the quality of life and employment for all citizens, whether they live in small, medium, or large cities. And we're talking about this precisely today. I would also like to take a moment to mention the issue of financing for development projects. This is for economic development. It's very easy when states, cities, or provinces are able to get international financing from international organizations at a low cost or even without cost to finance development projects. And it's welcome when it happens, but when it doesn't, which is many times, it falls on the national or provincial governments to shoulder those expenses. We also believe that there are examples, and we know that they exist at the regional level in Argentina at least, and I'm certain that they also exist in other countries, of competitiveness funds that are exclusively financed by the private sector, which is, of course, the main beneficiary of this economic development. I'd like to just share this vision of what we are doing today in Argentina, and we are forging a new path of economic growth for the well-being of all of our society. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, embajadora, por su...
Thank you for your valuable contribution, Ambassador, for participating and taking the floor. And now we have a video. I understand that this is from the Guatemalan delegation. I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to all. Thank you to the outstanding panelists for their detailed presentations and to all of the member states that have taken the floor to share their perspectives and visions with regard to this topic. As the chair stated, we requested that the Secretariat project a video with an intervention from Guatemala by Mr. Francis Marroquin, the Director of the National Competitiveness Program. Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador Clark, Distinguished Ambassador of St. Lucia to the OAS, Chair of CD, Ms. Executive Secretary Kim Osborne, all permanent and alternate representatives of member states of the Organization of American States. My delegation is pleased with the presentation from the experts who have been at today's session of the Council to share on this very important topic for our region and for Guatemala specifically. And for me, it's an opportunity to reflect on how government policies can drive competitiveness at the national level and also drive economic sustainable development in our cities and regions. This is a problem with many different responses, but I would like to share mainly on the fundamental role played by implementing policies that allow us to ensure legal certainty through administrative streamlining and simplifying processes. In the Guatemalan context, we have a law on mainstreaming requirements and paperwork required, and this has been a crucial step forward in this area. Cutting red tape promotes competitiveness for companies, and this is an essential factor in driving economic growth at the local levels. By eliminating unnecessary barriers and red tape, we are able to reduce costs for business owners and improve trust in public institutions. We are also able to make more flexible processes, which generates economic activity and greater employment at the regional level. This was a fundamental strategy, and that includes digitalization and automation of public services as a show of the implementation of user portals and informative bulletins that provide citizens with access to processes and promotes interaction between them, government, and companies. This is for the entire population, and innovation like this improves accessibility, traceability of processes. It improves transparency, and this is a key component in driving local economic growth. At the local level, we need to create an environment that drives competitiveness and innovation, and to do that, access to information on processes, strengthening clear legal frameworks and specific policies that address the needs of each region are crucial. We focused on specific productive sectors. Public policies, hand in hand with these sectors, can be fertile ground for sustainable economic growth. These sector-level initiatives, supported with incentives and training programs, can be a driver for regional and subnational development, as well as development policies that must promote responsible practices with use of natural resources, renewable energy, industrialization, and social inclusion. We're working on sustainability, and here policies should drive a balance between economic development and preserving the environment. Finally, I'd like to highlight the importance of interinstitutional cooperation so that policies are effective. It's vital for the various government entities work hand in hand with a regional approach. Initiatives that are successful depends largely on all involved institutions being part of this process. Through this collaboration, we're able to ensure that our political reforms actually reach the entire region and all sectors and drive competitiveness from the local to the national levels. To conclude, government policies aimed at mainstreaming and digitalizing innovation and sustainability are key to driving subnational competitiveness. If we want our regions and cities to become drivers of economic development, we must continue to promote reforms that streamline administrative processes and promote sustainability. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por la proyección del video.
Thank you for that video, and we would like to thank the Guatemalan delegation and Thank you to Ms. Marroquin for her participation via video today's session. Thank you very much. Dear representatives, panelists, and guests, we have reached the closing of this segment, and we've had an opportunity to reflect deeply on the importance of connecting our cities and regions to drive subnational competitiveness, and we have heard valuable contributions from various experts and representatives of CD's member states. Not only does this enrich our perspective, it also drives us toward concrete collaborative actions to overcome the challenges that we face in our cities and regions. These reflections have lit the path ahead to strengthen our partnerships, to promote innovation and equity as pillars of competitiveness in our hemisphere. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the panelists who have made presentations today. They have inspired us to continue driving regional cooperation and competitiveness. And to each of the delegates, thank you very much for your valuable contributions today and for your commitment to such important topics. Thank you very much. If there are no further comments, then I suggest that CD express its gratitude to the Secretary of CD, Ms. Kim Osborne, and thank you very much to all of the panelists for your contributions. Also, I would like to propose that we instruct the Secretariat SETI to adopt a document and follow up on all of the opportunities for cooperation that we have identified today. I would also like to suggest that member states that are interested publish, and the Secretariat can certainly help you with COPARANET, to publish all of the opportunities that we have heard about in today's session in order to continue driving this exchange of initiatives. I think that we all have COPARANET tools available to us. And thank you very much to the Secretariat for your assistance in adding value to this very important tool. Before we conclude, I would like to open the floor if anyone would like to discuss the roadmap that we just read.
Caso de que no.
If not, we will then agree on that. It is hereby agreed. Item 3 on the order of business, the title of the draft resolution, Physical Connectivity to Promote Trade and Regional Integration as a Driver of Economic Growth. This document was presented by the Secretariat to the Chair and is distributed to all with the code CD/doc.439/24. I'd like to highlight the leadership of the Chair of CD, our beloved Ambassador, Ms. Clark, for making this relevant topic a priority for our region. Physical connectivity is essential for driving trade, regional integration, and inclusive sustainable growth in the Americas, as is recognized by the OAS Charter itself. I would like to invite the delegations to dialogue on this draft during today's meeting in order to enrich our exchange and come up with a resolution that reflects the importance we place on this topic for regional integration and development. They are an inspiration for us to share in today's council, and I'd like to take this opportunity also to share that in order to facilitate this exchange, the Secretariat has established a virtual forum on COPARANET, and we've sent credentials to all of our missions in order to have a space available up to December 4th to present any comments and also to see the proposals from other delegations in real time and to reach a consensus with regard to this very important text. I also inform you that we will be holding an informal meeting of CD on the 3rd of December. The aim will be to continue deliberations on this draft resolution. The objective is for the resolution to be adopted at the session planned for the 10th of December. That will be the last session of the year. I'd like to open the floor for delegations to share their comments and opinions before we move forward with deliberations. Thank you.
No había. No habiendo.
There is no request for the floor, and so I would like to thank all of you. Please note the proposal made. And so we urge all of you to be active participants in this forum created by the Secretariat. And now we will move on to item 4 on the agenda, which addresses the ministerial sectoral processes in CD. At this time, we will be focusing on the process regarding science and technology. As part of the science and technology process, we will be holding the 7th meeting of ministers and high-level authorities in science and technology, the 7th REMSIT, on the 12th and 13th of December of this year in the OAS headquarters. First of all, we will be considering once again the preliminary list of observers and special guests that has already been reviewed, and it was distributed as CD/doc.433/24 Rev 4. I would like to invite the delegations to refer to that document on this item of the agenda.
De no haber objeción.
If there are no objections, then I suggest that we approve this list. It is hereby approved. And now we will move on to regulatory issues related to the 7th meeting of REMSIT. We will be discussing the establishment of the order of precedence of delegations of member states and permanent observers. In this sense, the rules of procedure for sectoral meetings specialized at the ministerial level or level of high-level authorities of CD establishes in its Article 14 that the order of precedence of the delegations for every meeting shall be established by the corresponding regular or special meeting of CD in alphabetical order in Spanish based on the random selection of the first to go. Similarly, we will establish the order of precedence for permanent observers, and additionally, Article 2 states that the delegations shall be ex officio vice chairs of the ministerial and or high-level meeting and will substitute the chair in his or her absence or impediment pursuant to the order of precedence laid out in Article 14 of these rules of procedure. Therefore, we will now draw the name to determine the first delegation to speak at the 7th REMSIT, and I would like to ask the Department of Conferences to assist with this step.
Muchas felicidades a
Peru. Congratulations to Peru. You have won the Order of Precedence raffle. Congratulations. And so now we will look at the other box of names for the permanent observers.
y la buena suerte para
Australia. Best of luck to Australia, which is first in the order of precedence for the permanent observers. Thank you very much. And so now we have identified the delegations that will go first. And we'll give the floor to the member states if they would like to refer to this topic.
de no haber.
If there are no further observations, then we hereby note the results for the establishment of the order of precedence for the 7th meeting of REMSIT. Delegations of the member states will begin with Peru, and for the permanent observers, we will start with Australia, as we just determined. If there are no further objections, we will approve that. Hereby approved. Now we invite all member states who would like to present any information to CD. We would like to open the floor for any delegations that would like to request the floor. If they do not have anything to share, then the Secretariat will make an announcement in this space, and we open the floor We give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for taking the lead in our meeting this morning. Good afternoon to distinguished ambassadors and delegates. I just want to take a moment to emphasize the importance of attending the Science and Technology Ministerial, which is scheduled for December 12th and 13th here at headquarters. Why? If member states have had a chance to look at the agenda that has been put forward for this ministerial, you'll recognize the critical topic that we're addressing and the manner in which we're proposing, or the COMSIT has proposed, that we look at the issue of artificial intelligence, that of trying to work with member states towards establishing models vis-a-vis institutional, regulatory, and legislative frameworks or governance frameworks for AI, which we believe is critical to the way forward with AI. We want to ensure that we're approaching this issue of artificial intelligence in our countries in a very coherent manner. As you know, we launched in the CENIA in Chile is the OAS Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence. That center is also being supported by the center in Colombia, in Barranquilla, Colombia, on artificial intelligence and robotics. So we have two centers that are solidly positioned to work with us on the issue of artificial intelligence. Interestingly, within the context of the OAS, for the first time, we will be having an intra-secretariat dialogue on how we look at this issue of artificial intelligence from a democracy perspective, security perspective, human rights perspective, and development perspective, essentially the four pillars of the OAS. Another very interesting feature of this year's ministerial and member states, if you've not already received our permanent representatives and delegates, if you've not already received the invitation, you will be receiving the invitation to the Science and Technology Awards of the Americas. We're very proud of this new initiative. To be honest, when I thought of launching this, I thought I was doing something very novel. Turns out I was not. We had in the 1970s, believe it or not, the OAS Awards, Science and Technology Awards. And at that time, we were awarding our scientists across the region $30,000. We're no longer at that point, but we believe it is critical to recognize those who are building our societies, who are contributing to science, technology, and innovation in the Americas. We will begin with the first 7, and we've identified those who've worked most closely with the OAS, but as far as providing cooperation between and among our countries, who have been devoting their time, their energy, their efforts towards supporting cooperation between and among our member states. We're excited about the group that has been selected, and going forward, we will begin the process for the next Science, Technology, and Innovation Awards to really come up with solid criteria for moving forward. So we really look forward to engagement. We want to have ministers here, so we encourage delegations and member states to urge your ministers to please come to Washington as we really try to build this agenda of cooperation, of collaboration, that we can really lay the groundwork for collectively and collaboratively addressing this issue of artificial intelligence in the region. And one more thing, we will be launching a new project funded by the US, and my thanks to Ambassador Mora and the delegation of the US. We'll be finalizing and signing our agreement on a new project on artificial intelligence for the entire region. So there's a lot to discuss, a lot to be had. We have leading private sector representatives from the leading private sector firms in the world who will also be part of the ministerial. So we really believe that we have a strong agenda and encourage participation. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me this opportunity to speak and to encourage participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, illustrious permanent representatives, we have come to the end of this very fruitful session. Delegates, all the participants in the room, and those who are with us virtually, I would now like to sincerely thank you for all of your comments and for your commitment for all of us. We would like to especially thank the Executive Secretariat, Madam Kim Osbert, and Sadi's team, my colleague, Mr. Sabana, for their professionalism and cooperation in taking on the chair of this session, and our chair, Ambassador Elizabeth Bagley Clark from St. Lucia. Thank you very much. Your leadership has been crucial for our success today. And then I don't want to overlook the opportunity to underscore the importance that the Charter of the OAS accords to Chile plays a fundamental role for integral development in our region. This council has the privilege and the responsibility of promoting development and initiatives that favor integration of privileges for the benefit of our people. We have taken note of all the comments made here in the room. This will be the bedrock so that we can follow up all of the opportunities that we discussed in today's session and to enrich the content of all the initiatives that we continue to spearhead in this council. I would like to encourage you to continue to actively participate in all of the dialogues, fora that we have in the OAS, in CD, the ministerial meetings that we were just spoken to about by the Executive Secretary, and may we have all the tools necessary so that we continue to build consensus and promote inclusive development in the Americas. Without further ado, I should also like to thank the interpreters and all of the officials in the conference room. Thank you very much for being with us, for your participation, both here present and virtually. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.